In Plato's Apology, Socrates advocates for the necessity of living an examined life, a life where one thinks deeply and critically about how a human life should be lived. In fact, in a famous passage, Socrates tells the jury that the unexamined life isn't worth living. Or, to be more precise, Socrates tells the jury that such a life isn't worth living for a human being. This commitment to living an examined life requires not simply going along with the popular beliefs of the majority. It implies that Socrates should not concern himself with wealth, reputation, and honor just because these things are highly prized by his fellow Athenians. Instead, the examined life requires a steadfast commitment to scrutinizing one's beliefs with reason and pursuing virtue in order to ensure that one's soul is in the best possible condition. Yet, while these high-minded ideals sound nice, we still need to ask, at what cost should we pursue an examined life? What could an absolute commitment to the practice of philosophy ultimately cost us? In our class discussion of the Apology, it was pointed out that a downside of living an examined life is the possibility of social isolation, of becoming isolated from those with different values. In many cases, human communities are held together by some creed, system of values, or set of beliefs. This is what unites organizations as various as countries, political parties, labor unions, and religions. Yet, we also just remarked that the examined life excludes uncritically accepting any belief system or worldview. For the person who lives a truly examined life, all beliefs must be scrutinized by reason. As such, it is not difficult to see how rigorously pursuing an examined life might prevent one from embracing just those common beliefs that enable participation in the broader life of one's community. In fact, it is arguably the case that this is precisely why Socrates finds himself in court in front of a largely hostile jury. If Socrates had lived a life in search of wealth, honor, and reputation, a life that his peers would have more readily recognized as a good life, and a life in which he would have sought validation and recognition from the power structure of Athens instead of questioning it, then it is unlikely that he ever would have found himself in danger of exile or execution. Socrates lived an examined life through the unrelenting practice of philosophy, and it cost him the social validation of his peers and all the social advantages and protections that go along with it. In a world where many, if not most, are happy to go along with the tide of unexamined majority opinion, and perhaps they do so with good reason, it will always be dangerous for those who decide to persevere in living an examined life. In our everyday lives, we may not, as Socrates was, be at risk of death for refusing to adopt the popular point of view. However, we are probably all familiar with the sorts of social ramifications, from the relatively minor to the more severe, that can result from contradicting accepted orthodoxy. These can range from suffering through unpleasant and awkward social interactions to losing friends and professional opportunities, or even having to endure outright social censure and condemnation. So, is the examined life worth it? Or is the cost of a life devoted to philosophy simply too high? The way we answer this question may depend upon what we think about the role that validation plays in living a good life. In this week's discussion, two different types of validation were mentioned: internal validation, the approval we give to our own beliefs and actions, and external validation, the approval that others give to our beliefs and actions. To what extent do we need the way we live our lives to be validated? And if we do need this, then by whom? As we have seen, living an examined life may prevent us from enjoying social validation. and may even force us to suffer myriad forms of social isolation. Perhaps, however, we can make up for this lack of external social validation with internal validation. Other people may not be inclined to grant us their approval, but maybe all we really need is self-approval. Socrates clearly was not bothered by the fact that others found his philosophical questioning to be onerous and threatening, and maybe that is enough. This is a tempting position to take. However, whatever merits it may have in general, it is not clear that someone living an examined life would value self-approval or internal validation in this way. The examined life is not just a life in which we resist the popular beliefs of the crowd, although it may often require that. It is also a life in which we resist succumbing to those beliefs and actions that we are personally tempted by. We might be the sort of person who is excited by the claim that maybe the earth is flat, or by the idea that 9/11 was an inside job by the US government, or who thinks that horoscopes are real. And we might delight in thinking ourselves among those rare few who can believe these things in the face of substantial social pressure. But that is not what it means to live an examined life. The person who lives an examined life resists the pull of fanciful beliefs no matter where the temptation to hold them might come from, whether that temptation comes from external social pressure or just our own individual inclinations. The point isn't to turn away from seeking the approval of the crowd only to then make ourselves subservient to our own self-approval. If one's reason for resisting common opinion isn't based upon an honest and rational evaluation of the evidence for that opinion, then the individual in question is likely feeding her pride more than she is pursuing an examined life. So, the person who lives an examined life isn't a serial conspiracy theorist or someone who is just a contrarian for the sake of being a contrarian. Rather, living an examined life requires subjecting our beliefs and actions to the critical scrutiny of reason. And even though those who support, for instance, the flat earth hypothesis undoubtedly possess the ability to resist the sway of majority opinion, they also demonstrate a susceptibility to commit themselves to unevidenced beliefs that fail to stand the test of critical reasoning. The fact that such individuals can hold fast to their beliefs without the social support of external validation, and very likely also experience a strong sense of internal validation, is not sufficient for them to qualify as living an examined life. Ultimately, this is because the end of an examined life isn't validation at all, whether internal or external. The point of living an examined life is the pursuit of truth and virtue, and whether that pursuit of truth garners majority approval, or even whether that pursuit garners our own self-approval, is, at least for Socrates, simply beside the point. The examined life seeks a good that is higher and nobler than that of social or personal validation, namely, the good of living a life that is grounded in truth, of living a life that is worthy of our status as a human being.